Hi, I'm West Virginia civil rights lawyer John Bryan. You're about to see two different videos from the same surveillance camera showing two separate clients of mine, both being beaten by the police. In both of these cases, I filed federal civil rights lawsuits. This is the view originally through the surveillance camera at issue here. This is the detention center in Wood County, West Virginia. That's Parkersburg. And there comes my client, Brian Sawyer. He's brought in by the Wood County deputies following his arrest after a domestic disturbance call. And you can see that there's a conversation now occurring between Mr. Sawyer and the deputy who arrested him. And they're exchanging words. You can't hear what's being said because there's no audio. Nevertheless, the deputy is unhandcuffing him because he's going to put him against the wall to do a frisk prior to doing the fingerprinting and the mugshot and all that stuff that comes with the processing portion of an arrest. The deputy puts Mr. Sawyer's right hand against the wall. He's unhandcuffing the other hand, and here comes the left hand up on the wall, and the pat down then takes place. The video skips at times because it's motion activated. They later changed the video camera to being on all the time, and you'll see that the second video that I'm going to show here is much better quality, and that has to do with this video, which ended up getting played hundreds and hundreds of times in federal court. So after the frisk, Mr. Sawyer sat back down on the concrete bench as he was asked, and the discussion continues between the officer who arrested him. And you can't hear what's being said. But the testimony was something like, well, you can take that badge and you can shove it you know where. And then immediately after that, you'll see that's where the use of force takes place. So I'll slow this down. You see he taps the badge, and then he grabs the client by the neck with his right arm. The other deputies are still watching, not too concerned yet. And then look closely, you'll see the video skip as the deputy's right hand goes backwards. Watch the elbow. There, it goes back and it skips. You miss what happens. But then you see again, an arm goes back and it looks like a punch. We played this over and over and over and over again to the jurors and to the judge. We watched it so many times in court, we couldn't have watched it anymore. And this is a unique case in that this video itself was entered into evidence. It was actually incorporated into the court order by the federal judge when he eventually ruled on this case. And still to this day, it's a part of the actual court file. It's the only case I've seen like that. So I took that case all the way through the motion stage and all the way to a federal jury trial, which happened to be the very last jury trial to ever occur in the federal courthouse there in Parkersburg, West Virginia. And to make a long story short, I played that video hundreds of times probably during the trial, stopped it at the freeze frame, and ultimately the jury came back and found in the defendant's favor. Following the trial, the federal judge, having watched that video so many times and having been convinced that there was excessive force there, he threw out the jury verdict and he ordered judgment as a matter of law in favor of Mr. Sawyer and essentially granted the entire case in our favor and ordered that there be a second trial solely to be held on the issues of damages only. So in other words, how much money is to be paid to Mr. Sawyer as a result of this excessive use of force, this civil rights violation. The defendants tried to immediately appeal that ruling to the Fourth Circuit. The Fourth Circuit didn't stop it, so we went to a second jury trial just on the issue of damages. During that trial, we entered into a settlement which did allow the defendants to take a shot at appeal to the Fourth Circuit. We followed the appeal process, and we actually had oral arguments before the U.S. Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond, Virginia. And ultimately, they came down strongly in our favor and upheld the judges throwing the jury verdict out, and upheld the fact that this was an excessive force civil rights violation. And in fact, it stood on the video evidence that I just showed you. And that's why video evidence is so important, especially in an excessive force case, because regardless of what the police officers say, if the judges can see it on video, there is precedent. The U.S. Supreme Court and the Fourth Circuit, including this case now, when opposing parties tell two different stories, one of which is blatantly contradicted by video evidence contained in the record, so that no reasonable jury could believe it, a court should not adopt that version of the facts. The video showed that Mr. Sawyer walked into that holding center room uninjured, and that force was used on him, and we also knew that he had a fractured nose and a battered face afterwards. Regardless of what sort of threats he made, the courts found that as a matter of law that no reasonable jury was entitled to disregard that video evidence in favor of the self-serving testimony of the police officers. Then there was a plot twist. Several years after this occurred, I ended up representing this deputy who was the defendant in the Sawyer case in his own civil rights litigation against a sheriff up in the northern part of West Virginia after he tried to violate a bunch of his civil rights. And in an even further ironic twist, the defense lawyer of the sheriff in that case was the same lawyer who had represented the defendant deputy in the Sawyer case. So same guy, same lawyers, but the lawyers are now on different sides. So the other interesting thing is that all of a sudden there was another case taken by this same surveillance camera, except this time it was better because of the earlier case. Now it was on 24/7 and it was better quality. So this is the Seabolt case. So it's the same camera, it's the same room, it's the same city, Parkersburg, West Virginia, but now we have a different agency. This is actually the Parkersburg Police Department, whereas in the Sawyer video, that was the County Sheriff's Department. So my clients had been arrested for public intoxication. It's not his first rodeo, and he's sort of running his mouth. And watch the police officer who's sitting down. He's listening to this, and the other officers in the room, and this is important, really don't seem concerned at all. And their testimony is that they really didn't see him as a threat at all. They weren't concerned. But still, Mr. Seabolt's running his mouth, and you'll see that he pops up here in a second. He's not in handcuffs, but he'll pop up and he'll kind of show his guns off. And some of the other officers are kind of snickering at him. So he's like, all right, this is lightning. You want some of this? And then look what happens. Boom! He throws a haymaker and just drops him like a wet noodle. Completely unconscious. And all of a sudden, we've got a problem now. He's completely unconscious, and you got the officer off to the right. He's just kind of shuffling through his paperwork. It's just another day at the office. And what happened here is, so they had to call for EMS. I mean, this guy was out cold. And so all of a sudden, then you have the video footage being pulled, and now there was a problem. And here's what happened. The young police officer who did that, he had never had any prior disciplinary history. His family had worked for that police department for a long time, but they threw him right under the bus. Believe it or not, they indicted him. And he later pled and was convicted of battery against Mr. Seabolt. And under the terms of this guilty plea, he had to agree to surrender his law enforcement certification, and also agreed that he would not seek employment as a law enforcement officer anywhere in the United States. Now, this caused a problem here for a civil lawsuit, because the first thing the insurance company did was send me a letter stating that, look, we're not providing insurance coverage. Sue this police officer all you want. If a police officer robs a bank, we're not going to be responsible for that. So in the end, ironically, I was sort of left in the position of trying to then defend this police officer to try to claim that he was actually acting in good faith under the use of force policy that he was provided by the city. And if you did look at it, it said if somebody was acting in a threatening stance or something like that, that you could use a closed fist punch. I think that's about what it says. Anyways, I finally got it within the policy. They provided the insurance coverage. I was able to settle the case. Throughout the litigation process, we actually found out that the mayor of that city, Parkersburg, West Virginia, had actually called a meeting of all of his police officers, and they had quite a few. And he said something to the effect of, you know what, I'm tired of some of these petty calls. I want you, if you keep getting called back somewhere, I want you to start beating people up, put them in the hospital. And one of the police officers, or several of them, had kind of blown the whistle on this. And they hired a lawyer, kind of came to me, had the lawyer come to me behind the scenes, and they were ready to testify. So this is one of the rare cases where we actually made what's called a Monell claim, a pattern or practice of civil rights violations that was actually successful against the city itself. And I took the mayor's deposition in either this case or one of the others. And so I went down the list of, Mr. Mayor, which one of your police officers is an honest person, a good cop? And he wouldn't answer that question until he knew which ones I had talked to. And of course, I wouldn't tell him. And so he wouldn't vouch for the honesty of even one police officer in his department while he was mayor. So there were cases that were settled. And there was even another case that I had. I don't think it was the same video camera, but it was another Parkersburg police beating case, excessive force, caught on video, and I have it here as well. This guy had been arrested for a DUI, and here he's being processed by two more Parkersburg police officers, one of whom is mostly watching, but the other one is engaging in a pretty violent processing for an arrestee. Now, the one watching ended up getting sued for bystander liability as well. And so you can't watch an excessive force violation as a police officer and not step in and stop it. So this case it was one of a long line of cases in Parkersburg that I had sued, litigated, and I believe that this one was settled, as was the last one. So thanks for watching. That was the tale of the two cases, both caught on the same video camera. Stay tuned for other interesting cases and updates and the pending cases that we're currently litigating. Make sure to subscribe both here and also on our blog website at thecivilrightslawyer.com.